This is insane. If you're a fan of Skyrim or even just the Elder Scrolls in general, some of what you are going to see in this video will most likely blow your mind, at least a little bit. And hopefully overall what you see in this video will get you excited for the future of Skyrim modding. What we're taking a look at today are some of the updates around Beyond Skyrim. If you're not familiar with Beyond Skyrim, in effect what it's attempting to do is recreate the entirety of Tamriel, but at the time of Skyrim. So for many of these places, you're either experiencing them for the first time or experience them for the first time at this time. For example, Cyrodiil is now several hundred years after the events of Oblivion at time of Skyrim, which means things are quite different. We get an in-depth look at that, but even further, we get to see all of these various projects connecting and being intertwined, which is honestly a pretty breathtaking thing to witness. I'll have links to the project down below if you want to check any of this out for yourself. They recently did a 2-hour walk around, and I want to highlight some of the major things that they showed off or described, but even further actually show you some of the teasers they have been sharing with their advent calendar. One of the first places we get to look at is Argonia as a part of Beyond Skyrim Blackmarsh, which is one of the most new of the projects in the Beyond Skyrim umbrella. Argonia is going to be quite distinctive to what we have by default in Skyrim and really what we're used to experiencing in some of the other Elder Scrolls games. You see lush green landscapes and even some scattered Iliad ruins throughout. As I mentioned, this is the newest project of the bunch, so it's pretty insane to see this degree of progress completed already. But very quickly we transition to a different and just really more tropical-esque environment. Argonia has this follow-through theme, and you can really see some of the similarities between these various environments. Clearly they are in the same rough area, but there's also a ton of diversity here. They actually shared a standalone gameplay video of these, and it does a great job of illustrating this diversity. You go from what almost feels like a swamp-like environment to something that looks supremely tropical, and then almost a lush savanna of sorts towards the end there. We get an overview of the marsh overall, and it just in general pretty wild to see how much of this is actually done. I'm just showing you snippets from the longer stream and walkthrough. There's even a small village and a look at some of the plants of the village at one point. They describe using a combination of lore from past Elder Scrolls games, as well as looking at some of the ESO lore and even some of their own extrapolation to establish what's going on here. They're remaining lore friendly, but with their vision based on the information available. But overall, this will be a very dissimilar region culturally. It is meant to be intentionally jarring first time you're going to go here. A lot of the architecture is going to be things you just don't see a lot elsewhere. Mud huts all over and even different designs between some of the rudimentary structures. They're not all just going to look the same. They show off the stone forest, notably more convoluted area that shows how untamed and wild this region is and is going to be to experience, describing how players will have a role in forging their own path here. We get to look at some of the interiors and a closer look at flesh fly zombies. There'll be a specific breed of insects in the area that will attack your flesh and thus yield flesh fly zombies. We get to look at Gideon, the holdout of Imperial power and major presence in Argonia. They're not at full strength, and some of the failures here will be exposed during the story. And the province here is divided. There's several groups that form coalitions. There's some tribals to more established locations like Gideon that are really standing out as their own. There's no singular power that is dominating this region. And although this overview of Argonia is pretty magical in its own right, for me, one of the first of several quite magical moments is as they start to show off their transition process. As I mentioned before, the overall goal of Beyond Skyrim is to create an interconnected Tamriel. You could go and walk everywhere. And well, we kind of get that here, or at least the first steps of that. Argonia borders Blackwood, and there is some representation of that in the Argonia world space, and there's also a process they're using of copying chunks of world space into other regions to continue this continuous Tamriel. They describe how it's not easy, but something they have to do. So even if you're only using one region, as you walk toward the border of another region and are still in your own region, you'll start to see the transition. You'll start to see that changing. But not only will you start to see the landscape start to change, you will actually be able to travel elsewhere. As you can see, we just simply walk onto a bridge and you'll get the option to transition from Argonia to Cyrodiil, as they built the tools allowing you to go from one province to another without some kind of compatibility patch. You could just kind of do it. They built a custom system to do this and describe how it allows both the player and NPCs to go seamlessly from one area to another. Again, all towards this goal of having a interconnected and explorable Tamriel from Skyrim and beyond. But now in Cyrodiil, which should look familiar to many of you as this is the setting of Oblivion, but again notably we are now exploring this 200 years after the events of Oblivion during the time of Skyrim. We get to look at some of the locations, the creatures we will be facing. We also notice we are largely in the same biome. Biomes are shared across the border areas for these various regions. There is this continuity built in. We have this really pretty walk into Leyawiin. Looks absolutely incredible and honestly a huge overhaul from what was there originally in Oblivion. The architecture here looks phenomenal, and of course the city itself is updated from that 200-year time jump. They describe how from city to city there will be some with more fundamental changes and some others with lighter changes, such as Water's Edge, which actually has seen some more significant changes since Oblivion. Notably, it's bigger, more lively. I really like how they incorporated and worked on the elevation here. Thus far, the town I would most like to personally visit if I was able to transport myself into Beyond Skyrim. They showcase one of the puzzle dungeons they are creating. Involves redirecting beams of light in an alien ruin of sorts. Honestly, more so than anything else, and I don't inherently mean this in a negative sense, but it gives me hardcore Demon Memory Sequence vibes. I am beginning to sound like a broken record, but Border Watch also looks great. As the name suggests, this is also a transitionary point and will lead us into Elseweyr. And you can see how the landscape will begin to change, and even some great custom rock textures they have created. And pretty quickly things convert into a complete Badlands, and it is pretty wild to look at just how in a bit of walking, you're able to transport yourself into what feels like a completely different world. It's one of those things that they've described to us numerous times, but to actually just see them walk from one place to another, and obviously you're seeing the cut up version, but seeing that walking in real time and all these different environments you're encountering along the way is pretty insane to witness. They mention how they're incorporating a bit of verticality here, especially in some of the canyon areas. They want to avoid that New Vegas-esque problem of just flat open land and really not much going on. It does create a sense of tension, and at least for me, claustrophobia as you're walking into this cavern and having things above you, in front of you, but also kind of tight at the same time. You can see the sandstorm kick in, and that too looks absolutely amazing. This really looks like something special that we simply haven't seen much in Skyrim's engine thus far. Even among many of the other mods out there, this really stands out as unique to me. We get to see a bit of a proof of concept for the caves here, one of the generic dungeon types that does have its own unique tile set. It's meant to showcase what caves will feel like going forward. It has unique music and overall design that looks great. Between the tile set, music, and even just the verticality playing a role in actually seeing the sky from inside of a cave, this all comes together to create a very unique and interesting experience. Then we transition to what I would just describe as a purely magical moment in Elseweyr, and that is Riverhold, a meshed Imperial and Khajiit city. The textures here are work in progress. The city overall is a work in progress, but this is something pretty amazing. Feels like it's that big reveal moment of a Bethesda stream. We're getting to see that city for the first time, and one day you're going to be able to just walk up to it and go inside of it, explore it, do quests here. And just like that, you walk out of a sandstorm from Elseweyr and back into the lush green world of Cyrodiil. It is honestly incredible to me to consider a mod team put all of this together, or really several mod teams all working towards a similar goal of an interconnected and traversable Tamriel. Here we walk up to one of the largest and most present locations we have seen during the gameplay thus far with Skingrad. We can see the custom markers and NPCs already populated into the town. They describe the city being nearly fully functioning at this point, and the more modern engine allows them to place more stuff in the city compared to what we had in Oblivion, and they could actually implement a lot more details overall. After this, they walked over to Anvil. I thought this was a cool transition. You could really see the major differences between the two cities, the distinction in architecture, and really what this team has done in recreating these two towns, but giving them their own unique identity. I think this recreation is far more illustrative than what Bethesda did originally with the two towns. The Anvil docks in particular really bring it all together and looking amazing in Skyrim's engine, a huge upgrade. But then from the docks, we get on a boat and are transitioned into Hammerfell and a look at some of the Isles of Iliac Bay. Another quite stark transition with the landscape and architecture. This really standing out against what we saw previously. We get a look at some of the various islands, and they describe that not only will be able to swim between each of them or even hire boats to take you there, but you could even do things like pick bananas in some locations. We see some of the architecture in the walkabout, but they've also shared some concept art of the farmhouses being designed for the region. As you can tell, fitting the desert theme and actually being quite a distinctive theme to where we go next with High Rocks Johanna. And this obviously looks familiar. Right across the border from Skyrim, and thus has a similar looking landscape, but also is going to have some distinction in the architecture and culture culture, this being due to the contrasting Breton and Nordic cultures coming into play here. They describe how even in some of the major cities, there'll be inns that are themed and culturally Breton, and then some others that are themed and culturally Nordic. As part of their advent calendar, they shared some images of Farron and Iliac Bay, which is more heavily Breton themed, so you can see that representation and the distinction of style visually, but also we should be able to feel it via the quests, via our interactions in these places. But then we get another look at more of the familiar, with a short boat ride over to Morrowind. Still absolutely insane to see this all interconnected. I feel like at this point I'm taking it for granted, but it is pretty amazing that they got this all working. We get a look at some Reaver camps. They describe how Reavers are the main bandit type you'll find in the New North, and they have made it so there'll be several different themes to make the bandits themselves a bit more interesting. In the background, you're seeing footage fighting some Dunmer themed Reavers, and they actually show off some of the new fireball effects created for Beyond Skyrim Morrowind, and something that's always great to hear. They describe how they've been working together with Skywind being a direct recreation of Morrowind, so remaking the game of Morrowind, where conversely Beyond Skyrim Morrowind is recreating the world space and updating it to be at the time of Skyrim, so things will be different, people will be different, and of course the quest and story will be very different, and basically describe how there's trade between the two projects. They're sharing tile sets, shaders, lava between the two. They're not competing or rivals, which is really nice to see as we have these two massive projects working in tandem with one another. They show off the updated look at some of the Morrowind tombs and even some fighting against bone walkers, which look heavily improved. These tombs described as being some of the more common dungeons that we will encounter, but they're spicing them up with things like ghost gates being added to add in almost a puzzle aspect to them. We can see a fight with a bone walker high summoner, which features some of the new armors created for this project. But the big one is they recreated and vastly improved many Weimar assets that will appear here. We can really see, and actually in these clips hear, the detail that has been added. Definitely seems like during our return to Morrowind, we'll be seeing these assets quite a lot, so it is good that they look absolutely fantastic. But then our stay in Morrowind does come to an end, and we transition to Roscrea, where we start off in the Crane Shore, the main Imperial location on the island of Roscrea. It does have its own unique tile set, as well as giving off its own distinct flavor, meant to be more frontier feeling compared to some of the other established towns we've seen throughout the rest of this stream and of course my video, and that frontier idea and theme is carried throughout the area. We can see the new iron armor created here, as well as fighting some Corsairs, which is a bandit faction, but they have a distinctive culture and favor different gods compared to the rest of the Roscreans. And they describe how, at a surface level, Roscrea should look similar to Skyrim, but as you go closer, you'll actually be able to recognize the differences and the influence the local culture and themes do have. Locals here consider themselves Roscrean first and foremost. They're hostile to outsiders and frustrated about the Imperial colonization. We walk through Stonefall, a village where most of the mithril is mined on the island, as well as a look at some of the guards. This is the first proper Roscrean settlement shown. It should have a contrast compared to the Imperial location we saw previously. This is a tent settlement though. The Imperials are located just outside walls, and it's a specific point of interaction and conflict between the various groups. And this is something we will be facing also, this hostility to outsiders. They describe how some locations will just not be very nice to us from the start, or really not want us around as an outsider from the start. We'll actually have to work and build towards some of those relationships. We're not completely blocked off for role-playing reasons if you do want to go a different route, but narratively they are against you from the beginning. And then we get to what is perhaps one of the most unique and the final destination on this journey with Atmora. Immediately get into a fight with something called a Ysserat, which looks absolutely horrifying. Atmora has its own language, and via experience here we will get to know this, such as the Ysserat. Later we get to face a few Hair Cult members and see their unique armors. They have a goal of wanting to steal as much knowledge as possible. There'll be quests based around this, and describe how the playable area of Atmora is roughly the size of Skyrim. But due to frost and ice water, this is not going to be easily traversable, and that really extends to the overall theme and focus of Atmora. It's going to be a harsh world overall with a ton of threats. Will yield a very unique gameplay style. Survival mechanics will be a cornerstone here. They're deciding on whether to use Frostfall or the Creation Club survival mode now that everyone has it, but your focus here is going to be on exploration and surviving, finding supplies to actually stay alive. And they even shared some about the Bear Cult as it's based here as a part of their advent calendar. But overall, that was a stream with some of the advent calendar updates intertwined. This project looks incredible. This really was one of the most unique experiences covered covering one of these upcoming mods for Skyrim or Fallout really, as this project is pretty much unlike anything else I've seen thus far from modding projects overall, giving you this unique interconnected experience that one day you'll be able to just walk where you want to, do the quests you want to across all of these different regions. If you want to stay more up to date or even tune into their advent calendar, as things are really heating up as of late, I'll have links to their YouTube channel, Discord, etc. down below. They're doing some pretty amazing work here, and I do recommend you check out the original stream, which I'll also have linked down below, because there's a lot I didn't cover, and getting to actually see this all unfold in front of you in real time is pretty magical. With that said, hopefully you guys found this one informative, hopefully you did enjoy it, and I do hope to see you all next time. Later.